bad. Okay.
We're live.
Hi, everyone. This is Jan Kabili, and I'm welcoming you to the Photoshop Show. We have a great guest tonight. We have Paul Caponigro, the famous photographer, workshop leader, instructor, and wise person, and a friend of mine, I'm happy to say. And we also have with us a great panel. So before we hear from Paul, I just want to say hi to everybody, starting with my friend Sean Duggan, who is kind enough to join us tonight. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Jan. Hey, everybody.
How are you doing?
Here. I'm doing very well. I've rested after getting to bed at 4:30 last night because I was out eclipsing.
You were eclipsing?
That sounds
yeah. I was not eclipsed, but I was eclipsing.
Are you going to show us your beautiful eclipse photo?
I can I can show you my pre-eclipse photo. I'm still massaging and finessing the eclipse sequence.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, you want me to show it to you now?
Totally.
Oh, okay. All right. Hang on a second. Let's go to my screen share.
Well, while you're doing that, a number of our panel were out shooting late last night. I know that Erika, you were shooting, right?
Sure was.
Did you get anything good?
I got a decent one. I wasn't prepared. I went out in my nightgown and I just shot away handheld, and it was just so much fun. It was such a cool color that I couldn't resist the urge to shoot it. So, nothing like Sean, but I had a good time.
Well, this is
mine
really...
should be up there
now. Yeah, we see yours now, Sean.
Yep.
So, Sean, tell us, what are we looking at?
This is a Donner Summit in the Sierras. So that peak in the background there is Donner Peak. It's about a little over 8,000 feet high, and that's this bridge is part of the original two-lane road that went across the Sierras, back in the 1920s, 30s and 40s, before they built Interstate 80, which they built like in the early 60s, I think. So I just decided that I wanted to go up, and this is about an hour from my house, so it's not too far, and I wanted to go to a place where I was didn't have a view obscured by trees, which I would have had around my house, and I just wanted to be in a really spectacular place, and I found a good spot.
That's beautiful. Is this a long exposure or just a regular?
This is an HDR blend of about 4 different exposures, ranging in length from about, I think, 15 seconds to about half a second.
Really nice. Well, I'm excited to see. You told me you've done a series every few minutes or so, so I'm excited to see how that comes out. I'm sure it'll be great.
Yeah, I plan to do a sequence shot showing the entire eclipse process, and I'm going to composite that together and put that over this landscape, so you see, all the phases of the eclipse over this place where I was.
Beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Can we see, Erika? Can we see what you took?
Yeah, I think it's on screen share. Yeah, there it is. I handheld 1/40th of a second, ISO 3200, and I put a teleextender on my 70-200, so I was shooting at 280 millimeters. And I rapid fired it so that way I could try and get the crispest shot possible. So it required some massaging in Lightroom. We had to get the contrast up, but it turned out pretty good for a handheld shot.
I can't believe you did that handheld. You're very calm. Mine would be like, ah! Excellent, excellent. And what about you, Dave? Do you have one?
Yeah, I do. I haven't had time to go through everything yet, but this was one I threw together. It was about 5 minutes before the full before it went full, so that's why it's so bright on the right side. In fact, this one was put together from a sequence of 5 shots to get be able to basically use HDR because it's just so much brighter on the edge than it is on the orange part. And so yeah, we have a nice little place out by our school. This is we have a little observatory off the campus, and nice place with no light. Telescope is not great for shooting. It's too close to the moon, so didn't have anything wide angle, so we were outside.
Were you using some kind of telescopic lens, or did you say, and I missed it?
Oh yeah, this is a 500 millimeter with a 2x on it, so essentially, effectively, 1,000 millimeter.
Very cool. Well, you know, I have to tell you that this is not anything that any of us prepared. We are just such nerds that, you know, here are like 3 people had terrific photos. I, of course, was sleeping. What were you doing, John Paul? Shouldn't I ask?
We were watching it, but we got clouded over halfway through, and it didn't come back. So,
Oh, bummer.
hey, that's what happens.
Yeah.
But we've got, 3 more tries in the next 6 months?
Is that right?
Yeah, we're in some tetrad, which is very unusual. It hasn't happened for 300 years, and so we should be able to see all of them in North America, and we've got 3 more shots. So we can touch base with all of these guys who got their shots about what we need to do to get our shots. I'm really encouraged by Erika, saying she can handhold the thing.
There she is, a superwoman. Yeah.
Well, very good, very good. So that was a fun night for all photographers, I'm sure. And there was some other fun stuff this week. And I don't know if you guys are excited as I am about the announcement of Lightroom Mobile. Did you see that?
Sure did, yeah. That's a very exciting thing. I know when we were at Photoshop World last September, they had alluded to going into the cloud with the part of the reason they did the smart previews was to be able to go into the cloud and then to work potentially on our mobile devices. And now we're seeing that come true, so it's very exciting.
Yeah, it is. It is. Now, personally, I'm waiting for the iPhone to get involved because I'm more likely to have the iPhone with me than the iPad. But, photos are so beautiful on the iPad, so it will really be fun to be able to sit back and go through your photos. And, you can not only just view them and add pick flags and put them in collections, but you also will be able to do some editing right there on the iPad. Now, do keep in mind, though, that your iPad is in color managed, which I'm not sure how they're getting around that problem, but I suppose you could crop and, kind of fix exposure enough that you could have fun viewing them, those kinds of things. Yeah.
It's in pretty good shape, and I know there's stuff coming down the line for color managing that stuff. It's imminent.
So that means I have to buy a new iPad, huh?
Yeah.
Nope.
No, yeah.
Nope.
I only have a 16 gigger. Now that's the thing I'm regretting.
I'd have to buy an iPad.
That would be necessary.
Well, just wait till they put the phone in there. But I think it's really cool. And the best part about it, I think, is that whatever you do on the iPad just appears in Lightroom on your desktop. So you're not doing that double processing stuff, And the other cool thing for me is that, I have a million photos on my phone, and when they involve the iPhone in this, it means they'll automatically sync right over to Lightroom on your desktop if you want them to. So, right now I never do anything with the photos on my phone. They're just sitting there until I remember to move them over. What about you guys? Do you think you would use it?
I downloaded it. Haven't had a chance to use it much, but it really intrigues me to be able to get at that quickly. Do you know when you have the raw file in your regular Lightroom, is it bringing over like a smart preview version of that to the iPad? Is that? It
is. I don't think it actually brings the smart preview itself unless you want it to, unless you think you're going to use your photos offline, at which point you can select a collection and have it bring a smart preview of everything in the collection right onto your iPad. I think, although I won't swear to it, that the rest of the time it puts smart previews of your Lightroom photos in somewhere in the cloud, in an Adobe Sync area of the cloud, and then your iPad is hitting those up as you're working. They're not actually on your iPads, but otherwise your iPad would completely fill up.
Right. And
that's pretty smart.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that's going on. What else is going on this week?
Well, I have some exciting news.
What?
I'm really excited because a lot of people, especially on Google+, but a lot of people are aware of the Arcanum, Trey Ratcliffe's brainchild for an umbrella mentorship right now for photographers and artists. And he's rolling it out very slowly, and last week he had announced three masters were accepting their cohort, their apprentices, for the first beta runoff. And this week they're announcing 3 more, and I happen to be able to now announce that I'm accepting my first apprentices in the Arcanum. So
yay!
I'm really excited.
I'm going to play the noise, but I can't remember where it is.
Yeah, I'm going to play the little soundtrack. But
I can't do it. Well, that's so great, Ron. I mean, you totally deserve it. And, you know, I should say that I was actually going to be one of the first of the 3 masters, but I couldn't do it because I'm all involved in writing this classroom in the book, and I already committed to that. And, you know, I got to keep my word. So I said, no, but I'll do it later. So you can blaze the way, Ron, and, you know, find out all the pitfalls and all the great stuff.
All the mistakes, and you get to come in after.
But I know you're going to be wonderful because you're such a great teacher and such a kind person, perfect mentor.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's going on, and good. So everybody who wants to join the Arcanum, you just go over there and join. And maybe you will get picked by one of the masters to be in one of the first groups of students, and then you can help too at the beginning. Because I think Ron would agree. This, I think, is really going to go somewhere. It's not just a wacky idea.
Yeah, oh, I totally agree. Having seen the amount of work and preparation and thought that's gone behind this, and the fact that they really want to take their time and make sure it's functioning well before rolling it all out, I really have a lot of excitement. I really see that it has a lot of potential for the future.
Cool. And those of you down there, John Paul, I don't know if you know what this is. Have you heard of this, the Arcanum or Arcanum?
No, it's the first time I've heard of it.
It's pretty neat. You should check it out. I know you're so busy doing all your things, but it's still, you should know what's going on. It's a Trey Ratcliffe brainchild, if that helps you find it online.
I'll share the link in the thing in a second.
Super.
So, anybody else have anything they want to say other than, oh, Erika, you didn't say hi. Well, you sort of said hi.
Hi. I'm doing well. Spring break happened, and that's about it. Nothing too fancy in my world at the moment.
What about you, Dave? Anything fancy?
Oh, just our spring break's over too. I'm back to work teaching, so trying to, and shooting in the middle of the night. Yeah.
Well, I am so excited, John Paul, that you agreed to join us again. We're so lucky to have you. And I wanted to tell you that I thought of you recently because I was teaching a workshop in Santa Fe, and we went to, is the Andrew Smith Gallery, I think it's called. Does that ring a bell, Andrew Smith Gallery? And I walk up to the thing, and it says in big letters, Caponigro, only it wasn't you, it was your dad who had an exhibit there, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Andrew's been dealing with Dad's work for a really long time, probably the gallery dealer that's gotten along with my father the best of any of them for the longest. He was actually one of the first galleries to give me my first show. So he has a long history with the Caponigros. It's
a really cool gallery. I truly enjoyed it, and you know, it has all that Ansel Adams stuff, which draws everybody right in there. You know, it's like you just have a blinking neon sign, come into this gallery, and so that works out well, right?
Yeah, it's almost a little museum, and in fact, I think at one point he was thinking about having it in a museum status and by appointment only. I don't think that actually materialized last year, but it came close. But it really is like walking into a museum. You've got the Stieglitz, you've got the Elliott Porters, you've even got the giant Annie Leibovitz. I remember they had a giant picture of the Blues Brothers for no less than $50,000 a pop. But, hey.
Yes, the prices are amazing. But anyway, it was really fun to see your dad's work, and I just looked at everyone very closely and see what it was all about. And it was very
really nice to look at original work. Once you actually see the physical prints, it makes a real difference.
It does. And you know what I was amazed at? This is interesting. That some of the photos that you see that are so iconic, when you look at the originals, maybe they're not so hot. Like some of those, the really old ones. I don't even remember whose they were. Not your dad's, but they had some older ones in there, and they really looked like, oh my God, I wish I could get my hands on them, and like open up the shadows or do something.
Yeah, it makes all the Steikens look really soft focus.
Right.
New lens. Maybe a little HDR.
Spoiled, but we could just do all that stuff in a second. Everybody is. Yeah.
Well, then it's also interesting to look back at the way they're using them. I think in many cases, some images are better for being less perfect. And so there's a real balance between the evolution of technology and using the limited means, but in the service of a vision, and where the artist knows those materials really well and they suit the vision. Again, Steichen is a really excellent example. I wouldn't want him to be more more focused, more detail in the shadows. I think that more impressionist style really works well with the portraits that he was making. Just like I like really early Michael Kenna work where he was using 35mm negs, and they're super grainy, like a Seurat drawing. It had a real distinctive taste, flair, style. So I think there really is such a thing as too perfect, and as corollary, perfectly imperfect.
Right. No, I agree with you. And, you know, the photographs should reflect the time and the materials and all of that, and the culture.
All very funny, because when Andy gave me my first review and said, okay, I want to show this work, he looked at this one image where I'd scanned, instead of photographs, scanned an urchin without the spines, and there was no detail in the center of it. I like this black hole. It was mysterious. What's in there? So, but you know, this isn't a good print because there's no detail in the shadows.
Oh my God.
It was such a classic kind of knee-jerk response without responding to the image and what was trying to be said. And then you look at what's on the walls. It's okay for Jackson to get away with that. It's okay for Stieglitz to get away with that because they're in the canon or because their materials were more limited. But I think there's a reason Steichen printed the way that he printed it, and it doesn't include shadow detail for similar reasons to what Greg Gorman does, where he uses all the new technology but deliberately gets rid of the stuff.
Shadow detail is, you know, it's only important if there is something significant to see in the shadows, and if there's not anything significant to see there, it's not that critical. And sometimes the lack of detail, not being able to see there, is significant in and of itself.
It's like the movie Alien. Until you see the actual alien, it's much more interesting. Aliens is a disaster because you see them, right?
It's true.
I always say that the best thing about photography is it records so much detail, and the worst thing about photography is that it records so much detail.
Yeah.
The real question is it significant?
As Ansel said, there's nothing worse than a sharp picture of a fuzzy concept.
Right. And Cartier-Bresson, sharpness is a bourgeois concept.
Right, exactly.
Twist on that whole thing.
Oh my God. Well, so John Paul, I've been watching, looking at your Facebook page, I shouldn't say, but on Facebook I see you posted a lot of photos from a workshop you recently did in Morocco.
Right. Just got back from Morocco.
What was that about?
Oh, Steph Resnick and I are going around doing these digital workshops internationally. We've had 2 bipolar years, both above the Arctic Circle and below the Antarctic Circle. And this was our first time into something a little less wild, though we still had a lot of time in big dune fields down south. But we spent 2 weeks in Morocco doing this big loop around Morocco. And it was absolutely fascinating immersion into both landscape and culture. It was the first time I'd spent much time in an Islamic country. And the difference between the south, the big deep deserts, on the other side of the Atlas Mountains, and what was going on in the north with, wheat fields as far as the eye could see, olive groves. Apparently they used to call Morocco the breadbasket of Rome. It used to take 2 weeks to get the crops over there, but it was far more fertile than I'd ever anticipated. And of course I expected a lot of cultural intrigue, so we say. Very interesting, very interesting. In a culture that's really shifting pretty dramatically over the last 15 years. Some of the people that were with us had been there several times, but it had been 15 years, and the kind of development the country's going through is dramatic. Also interesting stats like Arab Spring makes a certain amount of sense. 50% of the population is under 15. They've doubled their population in that last 15 years, and you see these entire towns tripling, quadrupling, quintupling in size because of a lot of urban development projects. So it's really a country in transition, put it that way. Fascinating.
So the iconic photos of the desert and the Bedouins through the desert maybe hard to find now, huh?
You just have to know where to look. They're actually not hard to find. There are some places like we went to the Merzouga, big dune fields down there, and the folks, several of our guides were from that area, and they said that the whole thing had been changed since the introduction of these, I'd say, larger hotels. They're not large by our standards, but by their standards, just to have this set of hotels along the dune fields and such accessibility really just changed the character of the place. But when you get out into, say, the Chicago dune fields, which are much larger, and you're out there in bivouacs, rough tents, for lack of a better word, it's I wouldn't say largely untouched, but you've got a very different sense there. And if you get out into a four-wheeler, on a motorcycle or on a camel, you really can get lost.
Neat.
Yeah.
I saw Seth posted a bunch from something called the Blue City.
Yeah, Showen. One of the reasons we wanted to go, I've always wanted to see that place. The whole place is, well, not the entire place, but it's three-quarters pale blue and very deep, kind of saturated lapis lazuli blue. So you're walking through these blue streets with blue stairs, and it's very, very picturesque. It's really, really quite a beautiful place.
Fantastic. Are you going to show us some of your photos from there tonight, or did you plan to show us some others?
I wasn't planning. You're going to have to go take a look at my Google Plus page, which I've been posting my postcards from those areas.
Yeah, I've been enjoying those shots. But
good, I'm glad you're enjoying them. I knew it was going to be a real challenge for me, photographing, well, doing street photography. I'm a landscape photographer, and I'm a surrealist, so doing street photography, photojournalism was really getting out of my comfort zone. And while I actually succeeded better than I anticipated, maybe Seth had something to do with that, maybe just sheer cussedness and trying hard and failing often, but failing often enough to succeed once in a while. It's still not the kind of stuff that I would consider part of my body of work or what I want to say with it. It's been fantastic practice and a good perspective for me, but the final finished work is yet to come about. That'll probably come about later this summer for my annual show.
But that's interesting that you say that, because you probably don't know my partner John Lorenz was a landscape photographer, and I think part of the reason is that he lived out in the middle of nowhere in the San Juan Mountains for many years here in Colorado. So he had this great, right in his backyard was this great place to shoot all the time. And when he moved to the city, he was in conundrum at first, right? Oh my God, what do I do? I don't shoot that. I don't know how to shoot that. There's so much stuff everywhere, and everything is moving, right? And he said to me a few weeks ago, he said, you know what? I have to say that I like shooting this kind of stuff, the city stuff, better now than I do the landscape stuff. I've totally flipped it around.
Yeah,
I was amazed to hear that,
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think it says something important, but if you're a photographer, eventually you can adapt to whatever your situation is. If you may not like it at first, but you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question is, does it become your passion and what you want to do with your life, which is probably the most important thing for any of us. I'm pretty clear that that's not where I want to go long term, but I've learned an enormous amount from going there. And it's raised a number of issues, and I'm sure it's not over for me either, that going back to that and trying to do it better and learning more tells me a lot about personal interaction. And Seth Resnick actually has this great statement, and he and I have been really influencing each other because we're traveling so much, and also we talk really intensely and fast, and we're really influencing each other in interesting ways. He's been talking about breaking personal space, and he recently rephrased that as a result of several of our conversations to entering personal space. And I think that's a really interesting question. Great portraits, or really good portraits, happen when you do enter both the personal space of the subject, but also your own personal space, that there's an interaction. And I think the same thing is true of landscape photography as well, but it seems initially much more passive, and I think there's a lot more responsibility on the part of the photographer to enter that personal space and to bring it, but also to really get into the space and the spirit of the place as well. So a lot of challenging ideas, and that alone is worth it. So I may have come away with 6+ images that I think will ultimately work, but I had a huge education in culture, a lot of personal insights into the way other people work, and hopefully I'll be able to make a better people picture too. So I might come away with better family portraits at the end of this as well.
Well, that's really cool. That's really wonderful. And we could talk about that forever, but I really would love to see what you prepared tonight. Are you guys ready for that, or do you want to do something else?
Always like to learn something new. I mean, we could, as a group, we could sit and talk for hours, but I know that our viewers are always anxious to learn a little bit more about Photoshop. So that would be awesome if we could transition to that.
Sure.
Okay.
Is this the point at which I click one of those funny little buttons on the left side of the Google
white arrow on the green screen?
Yeah. We'll see if my little 3-minute tutorial before the show worked. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yeah, we got your full screen now.
There we go. Okay. Before I get into this, I just want to let people know that there are a lot of follow-up resources up on my website. The challenge is learning to spell my name, but if you get close, I think a Google search will get you there. Under Lessons, Technique, there are a lot of resources here, and I want to highlight the masking section in here. You'll notice most of these are free. Anything that says free to members, if you click Get News, or on my blog, if you click the Insights, you'll get to this page, and by entering your email, you'll get a password that will allow you to access all those free to members resources. And I've been accused of putting 5 books or an entire library up on my website, and that's probably about accurate. And there's new stuff that comes out. In fact, in the next week or two, the next newsletter with new resources is going to be out. So this whole section on masking will be great follow-up resources for several of the things I'm going to be dealing with, and even more. So beyond that, and at the risk of starting with a complicated one, I want to start with making masks that are pretty complicated, like this Luminance mask. But before that, the reason I wanted to start with this is I wanted to talk about color, which has 3 essential elements, and I think I've spoken about color before on the Photoshop show. I think you guys archived it up on YouTube. So there's a lot of great past episodes that we can all learn a great deal from. I know I've got a lot of catching up to do. If this is the original, then what I've done is I've used the mask to lighten the highlights, and I think you'll see that the one on the right appears to be more luminous, more light-filled. The same could be said of the one on the right here, but instead of lightening, I've warmed the highlights. So again, this mask has been used to restrain an adjustment, and instead of lightening with curves, I've warmed with curves or any number of other tools. And finally, the one on the right also looks more light-filled, but in this case, the highlights have been saturated. So the point that I wanted to make is all 3 look more light-filled, luminous. They glow more, but they each target a different component of color. Luminosity, the lightness or brightness, warmth, the warm and cool or the hue, and saturation, how intense or neutral the colors happen to be. All 3 give you a different quality of light, and this is one of the reasons that I sometimes shy away from calling this dodging and burning, because dodging and burning comes from our history. It's a tradition of waving your hands or a piece of cardboard in front of a light bulb. It's not that precise, but it does amazing things, but it also leads you to think that it's just about lightening and darkening, and I want to emphasize that it's about locally adjusting, in this case, adjusting the highlights, but you can do many things. If you've got color, you can do at least 3 things: light and darken, warm and cool, saturate and desaturate. So back to this image. I'm going to open it up in Photoshop, make it a little larger here, and quickly show you how you can make a very complicated mask. For this, I'm going to need channels. I'll pull a channel palette out there, and if you take a look at the 3 channels, red, green, and blue, you can see that you get a very different contrast response from each channel. And in this case, this image, and it's image specific, this blue channel doesn't have a lot of contrast, so it's probably not a good candidate for a contrast mask, where green has a lot of contrast and it's fairly uniform. Red, on the other hand, also has a lot of contrast, but is targeted more to the middle of the image. And depending on what area I would like to affect, I'd either choose the red or the green. Let's just go for the green, and this one can be pretty quick if you use key commands, command-click, and you load a selection. Or if you just grab the channel and drag it to the selection icon here, you also load a selection of that channel. So the light areas are selected, the dark areas are not, or at least where it's black. All the shades of gray are also going to be contained in the mask that's made from this. When I say a mask, I mean I'm going to go to Layers, come in with an adjustment layer. Now I could mask any adjustment layer, and that's why I highlighted, do I want to saturate those highlights? Do I want to warm those highlights with, say, a photo filter? Do I want to increase the brightness with curves? Curves is probably my most versatile tool. And you'll notice that the mask is automatically created. So I had a selection before. That selection, once you make the adjustment layer for any of these adjustment layers, becomes the mask. And if you option click, you see what the mask looks like. It looks exactly like the green channel. So that's going to act as a resist. We've all heard, many of us have heard the mantra, black conceals, white reveals. So this mask is going to affect these highlights most, these midtones somewhat, these blacks not at all. So it's a resist, and that means that whatever I do here, whether it's brightening or whether it's go to a single channel, let's say that I want to warm up the highlights by adding yellow, it's going to affect the highlights much more than it's going to affect the shadows. In fact, it's going to affect the blacks not at all. So come back to the master channel. I'm just going to brighten this up. And then you've got even more control. But wait, there's more. It's one of those moments in Photoshop. If I command or I option click on that mask, see the mask, I'm just doing this to show you what's going on. I'm going to take this extra step. If I go to Image, Adjust, Curves, notice all of my hue or saturation adjustments have been grayed out. And the reason that is because I'm on a mask which is black and white. It's just black and white pixels. So we can only make lightness or contrast adjustments here. But I can make a curve to that and make the mask either lighter or darker or contrastier. We can make this contrast mask contrastier and trim the mask any way that we like. In fact, you can even invert it by moving the white point to the black point to the white point, and usually they need some darkening, these inverted ones. So I'm affecting only the shadows. Huge power here, just immense power. In fact, anybody who's done contrast masking in the traditional darkroom quickly sees just how easy this is. I've been talking about it, but we really could do this in about 6 seconds. Maybe we should prove that. But also the ability to change this, to change the contrast on the fly is extraordinary. And I think as a result, many more people are doing contrast masking than ever before, where in the traditional darkroom, be it black and white or ilfochrome, it was more of a black art, and only those who were really specialized, who really were committed, went to the trouble to do these. But again, let's prove this really quickly. Command click on the green channel, go back to layers, make an adjustment. We'll pick hue saturation just as an example. Saturate the highlights. We're done. What was that, about 5 seconds? Used to take about an hour and a half plus if you really knew what you were doing to get that negative registered with the original.
Yeah.
I mean, other people have done the color channel selections that I've seen, but the way that you do it, it was so simple and easy, and it really does bring the photo to a new level. I'm totally impressed.
I'm a big believer in simplicity, and I don't think simplicity necessarily means being simplistic, but I agree with the scientific principle, Occam's razor, and Einstein said make things as simple as possible but not simpler. We were just talking about the simplicity of the Google Hangout interface. I think the simpler you can make the interface, the more you're going to be using it more fluidly, and the more you can direct your attention and energy to visual decisions. We're making pictures, so what could be more important? I love simple tools that do an enormous amount. So,
you know, I have to ask you though, how you explain the concept of masking to people. You know, a lot of times I end up teaching beginning classes in Photoshop, and I always want to show them masks because they're so powerful, and you know, just because they say they're beginners doesn't matter. It's still important. So I show them, and sometimes you'll see the light go on, but a lot of times you see the veil come down, right? There was something about the concept of the mask that is really hard to get into people's head. What do you think about that, and how do you get around it?
Well, I agree with you. It's one of the things that I look at when people say, do you want to do am I ready for your advanced printing course, or should I take the intermediate printing course? Or am I even ready for the intermediate printing course? And if they haven't heard about masking, they're not ready. They might want to watch a video or read something else. If they are familiar with it but they need some practice, definitely the intermediate. If they've got it down, been there, done that, they're ready for the advanced. There's something about it that is challenging to people. But, you know, that little mantra, black conceals, white reveals, if you think about it, it's just luminance values, black pixels, black hides, white shows. The lighter it gets, the more it reveals either what's on the layer or the adjustment layer. it actually can be pretty simple. And in fact, this mask right here is, to some degrees, far too complex to make this point. And I'm going to move into a couple of other things where you see just some very simple ones, but based on your question, let's just start with a regular lasso tool. Doesn't matter that we're doing anything too precise. Make an adjustment for it, and you can see this is very simple selection. Just option clicking, seeing the selection, do something with it, whatever happens inside, wherever it's white. Right? And then, of course, you can invert it so it happens outside what's white. If you can keep it that simple and say, look, it's just shades of gray. I think also to be able to relate it to people's knowledge base. Some traditional photographers, though that's dwindling these days because we've been digital for so long, will understand the concept of a mask. But I think many more graphic designers, if they've had a traditional base, will also understand it because we'd be talking about rubylith, or even watercolor painters will often use things like kind of a strange rubber cement called maskoid that would act as a resist. And if you can relate it to a knowledge base, then people suddenly get, okay, this mask is really just resisting it in some areas wherever it's black and not in others wherever it's white. And it can be as simple as a simple shape that you've made. It doesn't have to be as complicated as this luminance mask, which is probably one of the most sophisticated that you can make. So I'm not sure.
That's all good advice and a good way to put it. And
also like a stencil too.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody who's done airbrushing will know, about making a mask, whether it's with paper or tape, or, gosh, even if you've done house painting, you get that low-tack masking tape. Put it on the side of the wall to make sure it doesn't hit the wall. You're masking it all with masking tape.
I was involved in doing black and white darkroom work and photo reproduction and photo restoration, so I had airbrushes and masks and acetate and all kinds of different things. So the concept of masking wasn't foreign, but like you said, somebody who doesn't have that background, you've got to find the connection that they can relate it to.
Right. And I think as educators, that's challenging for all of us because we're dealing with a generation of people who have not had that relationship with analog materials. It's very interesting for me to watch my son. I was teaching him drawing before dinner tonight. We were going after something, but he likes to work with a lot of digital media, whether it's his iPad or he likes to draw with Flash. Go figure. So it's a different knowledge base, and you have to find different ways to express that.
It's a good point. Yesterday I was teaching Lightroom to a group of grown-ups who were all in instructional design, and I said something about the analogy to the card catalog in the library, and the bunch of them looked at me like, the what? I don't know that anymore.
It's a generational thing for sure.
Right. Okay. So then how do you teach Lightroom? It's like a card catalog.
They can't use Lightroom. That's it. That's right. Oh, I've been here. I bet I know where this is. Italy somewhere?
No, actually, this is Santa Fe, where I grew up. It's up in Ghost Ranch, not far from George O'Keeffe's ranch up there. It's Echo Amphitheater.
Sweet.
And it's just one of the images that's helpful for highlighting just how far you can go with local adjustment, aka dodging and burning. But again, it's lightening and darkening, it's warming and cooling, it's saturating and desaturating. One of the things I wanted to highlight is it's not just the technique, it's also how you apply the technique that can make or break the final effect or an image. And there's a lot of ways of getting after an image that I wanted to highlight here. So let me start really quickly with some very basic dodging and burning techniques. And when I say dodge and burn, I'm not talking about using the dodge and burn tool, which is something that I actually don't do, and I'll show you why in just a second. But to start with, I'm going to make a selection here. And I'm going to come in and make any adjustment layer, but instead of actually making an adjustment here, I'm going to use either multiply to darken or screen to lighten. And this is actually an interesting thing. You can use the move tool to scan around and look into, if you're say on screen, look into shadows and say, is there any detail in there for me to reclaim? Or on multiply, we could look into highlights and say, just how far could we go? And we see there's quite a lot of detail in this file that could be rebalanced so that the eye...
I've never thought of that. That's fantastic.
It's just a quick little window. Just
Yeah.
Grab any selection that you like. It could be an oval, it could be a triangle, anything you like. But then all I'm doing is using the move tool to move the mask around, just sort of scan through the image and say, where is it worth my investing a little time in? How far could I go? In fact, you could probably go even further than this. If you double this up, you can get twice the amount of correction, twice the multiply there, and or you could use the curve and just darken it down further or lighten it up further if you're using screen, just to see how far can you go. So it's a good quick check. Just say, what do I want to do here? How far can I go?
And would you always use the multiply blend mode when you do that?
Oh, I always avoid saying always and never say never, except when I say that. But if you want to see light areas, I do recommend the multiply. It's very good for seeing the darkening effect, and screen is great for opening up in shadows, just a quick hit on that stuff. Of course, that's working against us. So, yeah, I tend to use those too, but there are probably other ways of doing it. And as long as you get a good window into your file, that's all that counts. It's, last thing I want to do is propose some kind of dogma. So what I want to do is use those multiply screen blend modes to paint those effects, but I can do it on a single layer. If I make a new layer here and change the blend mode to overlay, which is essentially a combination of screen and multiply, but I'm going to have to put some paint on there. And here I'll use a soft edge brush. I really do recommend a soft edge. If you have a hard edge, you're going to introduce hard contours into your image, where if you have a soft brush, it'll feather it in and blend in a whole lot better. The other thing that I like to do is use an opacity roughly 50% if I'm not sure how far I'm going to go. Brush it once, and then here's a quick little trick. Instead of, you may have seen a lot of people coming out with 10 or 20% and stroke and stroke and stroke again. It tends to taking longer, it tends to being a little less precise, and it tends to produce an uneven effect. Here, if we go to Edit, Fade, and fade the brush tool, notice you can only fade the last brush stroke. And I made this all in one big brush stroke. If I've done 2 brush strokes, I'll show you. I can only fade the last brush stroke. Here, though, I go to Fade Brush Tool, and I can lower it or raise it to get a more intense or a less intense effect. And instead of saying 10, 20, 30, I can say, you know, this is a little too much, this is a little too light, let's go right here. I never would have guessed that I wanted 55, 56% for that precise effect. It's quite useful. But again, if you have 2 strokes, you can only fade the last stroke. You can't fade the second to last stroke, in which case I've got to go backwards, Option Command Z, and just step back in history and start all over again. So it tends to lead towards painting larger, broad areas. The other thing is if it spills over into an area, something like that, you can come in with the eraser tool. And here I would tend to come in with 100%, but you could use 50% to erase it partially and just erase it from the areas that you don't like. So I've got this area where I've painted black in a couple of areas, but it's totally modifiable, and I haven't started painting white paint, which will give me the opposite effect. So if I'm on my brush, I use the X key to reverse my foreground background and come in with, say, a white brush into these shadow areas. I come in and open those up. Again, I'm at 50%. Again, the key commands, and these are really useful because I use them so much, it's worth remembering a few of them. Anybody who remembers all of the key commands in Photoshop is really scary. Just like any image that's had all of Photoshop applied to it is really scary. But there are some that are really worth remembering. So Shift Command F, F for fade, will let you re-access that and make that more intense or less intense. And by lightening and darkening an image, you can rebalance an image. I'm always looking for black holes that catch the eye and have a hard time letting the eye out, or white spots that constantly drag you into an area. And by rebalancing this, I can look at the overall image more. I can appreciate these without getting dragged back to this highlight. I can get into the shadow, but still I can get back out. And I look at how you reorchestrate the dance of the eye. It really is like a dance. How do you move? Normally we enter from the left. We tend to go left to right, top to bottom. We really circle around very quickly. And we've got all these different points of entry, like this black line creates 2 points of entry, one at the top, one at the bottom. Same with the shadow. Anytime we touch the frame with a significant element, and it could be the contour of an object, it could be a shadow, it provides an entry point for the eye, which you may want to use to modulate it further. So in this case, let me show you the kind of thing I'll often do with sketching, and coming from a drawing and painting background, it really helps to be able to break an image down. I think one of the harder things for photographers is they come to images so fully formed that they don't look at the abstract underpinnings of the image, and they have a harder time breaking it down into its component pieces, the more abstract qualities of it. So in this case, I've just created a new layer and placed a line on it, just to identify 4 of the most important lines in the image, if not the most important lines, which is the frame. It delineates what's in the frame and what's out. It creates all of these power points, like the corners, the center of the frame, but it's also what this shadow touches, what this black line touches, and that's a very powerful entry-exit point for the image. So one of the things that a lot of people do is they vignette the image. If I turn this to overlay, reduce the opacity, what I'm essentially doing is strengthening the frame, directing more attention into the center, where I could get out of the image a little easier. Now with a stronger frame, it contains the eye, and I'm always looking for ways to get the eye to re-enter the image, or when it comes to a frame, bounce back in. I tend to not want to let the eye go away too quickly. It's also one of the reasons I think this image works better with this larger, massive column on the right, because the eye bounces off this and gets back in and looks at more of this. But the image areas on the left would capture the eye a little more easily if they had a little more contrast and a little more definition. One of the things that I think is weak is this leading line. So we have the shadow, but we also have the contour, or say the turning point of this plane. So that leading line can be a really powerful point to strengthen the image. And in this case, if I come back to my dodge and burn layer, use again the 50%, but stroke the dark side of that line. Notice I'm working hot. I think that's way over the top, but I can then again shift Command F, fade it back until it seems appropriate. And if we turn this on and off, you can see that structural element has become a lot stronger. If I came around and used white and stroked, say, the opposite side of that, again it's hot, fade it back. Now suddenly I've got a much stronger line through that. It's strengthening the understructure of the image and giving the eye more to bounce back to and enjoy as it comes back for that bounce. So the frame, leading lines, and for those leading lines you can extend that into any kind of contour. And so what I've done is I've just outlined the 8 separate shapes. You could even say that this extra piece in here would be another shape. And each one of these, see how we've got a dark, light, dark, light, dark, light rhythm, and we can accentuate that, and we can accentuate any of those planes in different ways. Like this plane would get a little stronger if we used the black brush to make it more continuous, less broken, so it gets a little lighter at the bottom. So by making it stronger, we've made that entire shape stronger. You can also accentuate gradation across any of those. Let me back that up. One of the key concepts there is scan the contours of any significant object and/or any significant shape inside the image. And if there are parts of it that get a little weak, strengthen them so that they're more continuous. It's like making a broken line a continuous line. It makes it stronger and it holds the eye in and makes the whole thing more structurally cohesive. So within each of those contours, you can also play with, say, the gradation. Notice I've just put a gradient in here to indicate this. As a draftsman, we're constantly told how to render volume and form with shading. And you can do the same kinds of things here. If I use a larger brush, and I'm going to come down to, say, 20% here, and darken the left side, and then come in with a slightly smaller brush and darken the far side even more, and then maybe come in with the white brush to pull out the highlight there, much like I'm rendering a sphere with charcoal or with 3D rendering software. And can you see how this looks a lot more 3D than the before and after? Instead of being this flat column, it feels much more round and three-dimensional. And that's one of the key things that we all need to think about. If we're asking people to believe in this virtuous space, we often want to make that space as strongly felt as possible, and we can think about the push and pull of color. It's all, at the end of the day, small little squares of color, but it's the arrangement of colors, and those colors can be arranged into planes, lines, all of that. And this gradual lightening and darkening, or warming and cooling, saturating and desaturating, can create a sense of volume and depth. So it's much more than the very simple technique here. Is basically, it's just a layer set to overlay with black and white shades of gray. But what I've been talking about for the last few minutes is it's really the way that you apply the technique that adds the sophistication. It's a very simple technique, but what you do with it can be very sophisticated, perhaps even complex, and it can be very compelling. Just as an aside, you would need a blend mode, different blend mode, if you're going to warm and cool. So I'll pop in a new one. And in this case, I do recommend, I'm going to close this up so it doesn't get as complicated here. I do recommend that you rename these layers. I'm going to call this lighten and darken instead of dodge and burn. And in this case, let me come and change this blend mode to color. And I'm going to call this warm and cool. And instead of using black and white, I'll choose two different colors. Let's choose something like, well, actually the warming filter colors, the photo filter colors are quite good. In this case, I'd like something a little bit warmer there, and on the background, let's go for something cooler, like a blue filter that you might have put in front of the lens. Incidentally, I don't use filters anymore except for my neutral density and my polarizer filter, because I do things that Photoshop can't. After that, all my graduated filters, my color filters, they're gone. I've got far more control with these techniques that I'm showing you, and with multiple exposure techniques, which you guys have highlighted, like HDR and so many other things. So I can come in with this brush, and let's just go to 100% just to overdo it so you see what happens. If I paint on this area, notice the entire area gets yellow, the same hue that I'm painting with. Whatever hue I selected, it becomes both the hue and the saturation on color. And I actually should come back to that in just a sec. If we change it to hue, we should get a similar effect. Notice it's a little weaker, but it's not as saturated because we're not playing with the painting with the saturation. And notice I picked a very saturated yellow, but hue isn't showing that up. And that's significant if you're going to come in and say, let's say I'm going to cool this shadow on hue. I don't get a lot of response in there because there isn't much saturation in that very dark shadow. However, if I were to change it to color, I get a lot of saturation. I can easily come back and redo that. If you need to get a little bit of color, just say 10%, 20%, and or fade it until you find exactly what you'd like to do. So more often than not, I'd be using color, though hue is quite useful. Color allows you to affect more neutral areas and even interject a little bit of saturation in there as well. And I can paint warm and cool colors on the same layer. Paint multiple times. You can change the hue as you like. I recommend you paint a little bit hot and then fade it back. I love Brian Eno's theory of creativity. Go to an extreme, then retreat to a useful position. And I think all of this pendulum swinging that we all do, say, is it too light, is it too dark, that's visual research. And I strongly recommend that instead of conservatively creeping up on a target, you overshoot the target and then pull back to a level that you think is pleasing. Same kind of thing with this, with these painting techniques. Okay, last one. So what if we need to saturate? If I make a new layer, call it saturate and desaturate, and notice I can't do all three on one layer. I need separate blend modes. We're using blend modes with brushes. And here I'll change it back to saturation. So in this case, I need something neutral. It really doesn't matter whether it's black, white, or gray. I'll just put gray in there just to prove the point. And whatever I paint on will become desaturated, like a black and white image in a certain area. Of course, if I paint with 10%, I can knock the saturation of certain areas back. If I choose a color, any color, and in fact this blue will work well because there isn't really any blue in here, and I just want to highlight that it's not the blue that I'm painting with, it's the saturated value. Notice on the HSV values I get a 96% saturation. So it's a really saturated color, meaning I can get a very intense effect, but I can also dial that back with a different opacity. So as I come up in here, let's come in at 50%. You can see that it's not getting bluer, it's getting more saturated for whatever the color is down here, more orange, here, more yellow. And of course you can fade that back too. And or if you've forgotten, you've done 2 or 3 other things, remember there's always the eraser tool, which can not only wipe it out, but if you change the opacity to 50%, you can reduce it 50% and just cut it back. So these layers let you affect all 3 components of color, lighten and darken, warm and cool, and saturate and desaturate, and you can apply them to any of those areas of concern that we identified: frame, leading lines, contours, planes. In fact, there's 4 PDFs up on my website about just those specific areas of concern, and of course a lot of others there as well. So let me put in one other piece in here, and then I think we're probably out of time. Let's talk a little bit about gradients. Some of the gradients I think are ridiculous, but the gradients are extremely useful. I honestly don't know what they were thinking when they invented some of these gradients, and we'll go through that. There are a couple that are very useful, and it's one of the reasons why I get those graduated filters out of my pack and kind of lighten my load, but also gain more precision. And it's something that would be worthwhile talking a little bit about, just touching on why Photoshop is so much more precise than Lightroom, though some of the big, broad, basic moves can be done in Lightroom, and gradients is one of those things. So for a broad, gradual gradient, say something to affect this horizon, we're probably going to be doing just fine in either case. Here, let me come in and make an adjustment layer. It could be another layer that we paint on, either way. Remind me to come back if you want a little bit more detail as to why I would use a curve as opposed to brushing. Somebody asked me that question after we finish. And then as I come into the gradient tool, the foreground to background gradient tool is really the most useful. Now again, it's black is your foreground, white is your background. You could reverse it. Black conceals, so if I don't want the sea to be affected, but I do want the sky to be affected, there's my gradient. It's a small, tight gradient. It's like having a feather on a straight line. You can make it as long as you like. So if you redraw that gradient, now notice the top of the ocean is being affected. And these are shades of gray as well. If I option click on that mask, I want to show you a way to really get control over these gradients in a way that you can't in Lightroom, modify them later. Again, it's back to the curve. Same thing that I did with the contrast mask. It's all just shades of gray. This is simpler. As we move this up, notice when it lightens, it pushes the middle point, all those lighter values, down. As we darken it, it pushes it up. So I'm essentially trimming the gradient. If you add contrast, you can make the transition happen much more quickly. In other words, that feathered transition happens over a shorter space. Now, I recommend that once you know what's happening with this curve, you not pay attention to the mask, but you look at the total combination of the adjustment that it's resisting with the image, because at the end of the day, nobody really cares what your masks look like. In fact, if somebody ever asks you, hey, can I see your mask, you just say, that's a really personal question. All by way of saying, get a life. It's just a really polite way of saying that. Nobody really cares what those masks look like, but they do care what they accomplish. And you can notice here, as I'm darkening the mask, I'm letting less of that darkening adjustment happen to the foreground there. All up to me. I could come in with a tighter transition with contrast, and you can even hold the shift key here, highlighting both points, and move that particular contrast response up or down to trim the mask. And I wouldn't have known that's exactly the gradient that I needed to draw. But given this curve and this image and its dynamics, this is what seems to please me most. This could be on any adjustment layer. It's often really useful for, say, a photo filter if you want to warm things up. Maybe I even want to try a slightly more golden warming filter. There you go. And again, you want to resist part of it and trim it. Lot of really useful possibilities here. A couple of them I think you can absolutely forget. And let's do that really quickly. If I'm looking at it, Jan, maybe you know, or Ron, maybe Sean. What on earth was this designed for?
I have no idea.
The diamond gradient, useful for buttons on web pages?
Yeah, buttons on web pages and jewelry design work.
There you go.
I think it was there before they had web pages.
To recreate MySpace graphics, I think.
There you go.
They designed it because they could.
Because they could. And now they won't take it out of the interface because somebody might complain.
Right.
I think the angle gradient here is equally mysterious. My theory is monuments on Mars. I don't know what this is for, honestly. It's.
I use that to make a color wheel.
Color wheel, okay. Yeah, that's better.
You can make some really psychedelic patterns by doing it on like 5 layers and then giving them all blend modes.
Cool, Jan. How much pot do you smoke?
Color wheel.
Staircase. You just dodge and burn a little bit around, the center, and you've got a staircase.
There you go.
That was put there to amuse people who had nothing else to do.
The reflected gradient is nice, though. I like that one a lot.
The reflected gradient is fantastic. So
yeah, that's one of the most useful.
It really is. So you want to let's reverse that. You want to only affect the center. You're drawing with white from the center out, and again, you can do it in any angle, vertical, horizontal, as you like, and or go the other way. You only want to affect the edges and draw it longer, affect them more. Again, all of these can be adjusted. If you hit Command-M for curves, you can darken that, trim it, lighten it, as you like. Really useful. I also think the radial gradient is fantastic for any of those vignetting effects. Even out of a corner, let's say that you've got flare from a light source on the edge. So the radial gradient is fantastic. The reflected gradient is fantastic. And let's do one last thing, and then I'll open it up to questions. If you ever want to make a reflected gradient that isn't equal on both sides, then we could start using a different mode on our linear gradient. So again, we have all of these questionable features. I'm not sure I've ever used the rainbow gradient to good effect, but the first two are fantastic. Foreground to background and foreground to transparent. So if I change to foreground to transparent, the interface shows me, and I use black, and come in with, say, a very long gradient on the left and a very short gradient on the right, I've now got a customized reflected gradient that isn't equal on both sides, and you can continue to layer that up where you can draw and draw and draw again. And it's one way of creating custom gradients that are not in the interface as you like. You can just keep drawing those. You can also use blend modes. So very flexible. Those, all three, fantastic. And again, remember, it's just shades of gray. So using our friend curves, we can always come in and modify those. Even to the point where you may decide to break the rules. If you ever want black to go to gray, you just raise the black point. If you ever want white to go to gray, you just lower the white point. And of course, you can go so far that you actually invert it. That's all invert is. Black changes to white, white changes to black. So super flexible, and
just that trick with curves on these masks is worth the price of admission here.
Yeah, completely, I would say.
So a lot of info there, and again, there's tons more on my webpage, as I mentioned. All these masking resources, which will even give you a whole set of mask key commands or how to fine-tune gradients, as well as a lot of different strategies there. This is really the kind of stuff that I think is kind of the underpinning of Ansel Adams' famous statement, the negative is the score and the print is the performance. A lot of this dodging and burning is what he was talking about when he was talking about the performance, not just variable contrast papers to lighten and darken the image and add a little contrast, but also to go in and locally adjust one area separate from the others. And well, just as a final note of caution, Photoshop is so awesome because it gives you such precision. You can really get in there and fine-tune details to a degree that we've never been able to do before in the history of photography. But you got to ask yourself, do you really need that level of control? The kinds of things that I've shown you tonight are fairly broad, yet still far more precise than you could do in the analog darkroom. And just be careful. Once you know these masking techniques, these selection techniques, you're going to be dangerous. Dangerous not only to your images, but also to your time, because very often a simpler approach will get the job done just as well. You want to be careful of making selections that are so precise that they introduce contours. You want to pay a lot of attention to edge quality and making things blend in and seem naturalistic. So
wonderful. But you know what strikes me is that you need to have in order to make this really be advantageous, you need painting skills or some art skills beyond what many people who love photography may have or may have been educated in. Where can people go to learn? For example, just the little trick you did of working on an edge on the at the Ghost Ranch cliff. Where
Right.
you lightened one edge and darken another. That's something you would not necessarily intuitively know, right?
Right, but once you're exposed to the theory, you don't have to spend years learning how to draw. You're basically using a stylus or a mouse to trace over a contour there. Now, what kid can't take a sheet of tracing paper and trace over stuff? You learn that in kindergarten. You don't have to be this Michelangelo draftsman to do this kind of stuff. You just have to think about the possibilities. And that's what I've tried to do, to pull forward my painting background and move it into a photographer's language. It's literally, we're tracing on our images. It's not fancy drafting, but it can do some really, really sophisticated things to image quality. And
It's also, I think, almost maybe less of a painting skill, although, of course, you're applying what painters do, and really more of an observational skill. It's learning to observe what light does and how light affects surfaces and shapes, and just drawing upon that and recognizing how that can enhance an image. And that is something that I think is a learned thing. Not everybody comes to it naturally, but once you train your eye and study what light is doing to a scene, you learn to recognize those qualities more readily and can apply them to your images.
You're absolutely right. And we can learn a lot from what other people do. Sometimes it's hidden in photographs, but it's more obvious in paintings. Photographers have a lot to learn from painters. But mostly it's just a matter of taking an interest in how do things really look and figuring out how you can apply that, as you say, your sensitivity to light. That's all drawing really is. It's recording a way of looking. So if you can get your way of looking into your photographs, you make them more your own, you make them much more interesting. Because I think that's one of the toughest things to do with photographs. We all have these tools that can do virtually the same things, but at the end of the day, we're interested in doing things that are our own. And I think the more you bring your own sensibility, your own vision, your own style to that, the more that happens.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. I spent the last, 6 months really exploring luminosity masks and doing more with that in my landscape work. And just today, I wish I'd known that 6 months ago, because I would have saved hours of work. Just hours.
Just moving forward, keep moving forward.
Moving ahead, you've just saved me a lot of time, and like I'm sure everyone here is really, really grateful to have learned the fact that you can put the curves against the gradients and get just intimate control with them. That was really, really helpful.
Good.
Yeah, it's really wonderful, John Paul. And you do have this excellent mix of the intuitive, the art skill on the one hand, or what do you ever call it, your right brain, and then the left brain. And I do believe they're both important. I know some people say this one is more important, that one is more important. For me, it's both. And you are the master of both. So we so much appreciate you sharing everything you did share with us tonight, and just being your wonderful self, and we get to see you again, and that's fun.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
I think that you just elevated my level of photography. I think I'm going to have a dramatic burst just from this. I was doing similar things using a more crude technique in Photoshop, and so seeing how precise and focused you can get it, it's fantastic. I'm going to be using these tools on an everyday basis.
Very good. Pass it forward.
He's not just saying that. Erika is like the perfect person to tell this stuff to because she does use it, and she makes these wonderful things with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure most of us know that one of the ways to strengthen our skills is to teach it to somebody else.
Yes.
So having taught this for 20 years, it's all the questions my students are asking that help me be clear and to help me interface with different learning styles. And not only are we empowering our communities, but we're also strengthening our skills. It's a win-win situation. So to all of you guys who are watching out there, I encourage people to pass this forward and teach somebody else, share it.
Totally, and we will always say where we learned it too. I think that's important. I like that.
Thank you.
So this will be up on YouTube, and people will be able to come back to it time and again, and I'm certainly going to watch it again. But unfortunately, we're out of time, so we're going to have to say goodnight. If anybody has any last words, get them in there now.
No, we're just all just sitting here. Again, like every show, we just get wowed because we all learn something new every time. It's about the paying it forward. Each person here has something to contribute, and every time the whole crew leaves just in awe.
Yeah, you just get this, oh my goodness, why didn't I think of that?
So we're grateful to be able to share in this this forum that we have been so blessed with, this Hangout, the ability to broadcast this and to kind of pay it forward.
Really neat library on YouTube, so most of the shows are up there. We can watch them time and again, right?
Yeah, we got every show now up there. I think
We're up to show 155. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the trouble is that the indexing is not so great. It's very difficult to find anything unless one of us takes the time to write a description of the show. And, the shows are long, so it's hard to get to a particular part that you want to see. Hopefully that will get better as time goes on. But we are collecting such wonderful information. And, just to be able to see some of the people that you think are great and get to see that they're real people just like you, and that I think is important for everyone to understand. There's nothing, John Paul is really smart, but he's just a guy too, right? And if he can do it, maybe you could do it. That's the biggest message.
For sure.
All right, you guys, we're going to leave with that, and good night to everybody, and we will see you in another 2 weeks with another fantastic guest on the Photoshop Show.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thanks.